This episode is based on the story of Teal Swan. You know what's strange? Some of the most dangerous people don't make you feel afraid at first. They make you feel understood. Honestly, I think that's why I was so interested in this story, because the more I looked into it, the less it felt like a story about an influencer or a life coach, a cult leader, or any of that. It felt like a story about emotional vulnerability. It's about what happens when somebody figures out exactly what you need psychologically at exactly the moment you're desperate for it. So I started looking into some of the videos of this woman named Teal Swan. And if you've never seen her before, nothing about the videos immediately feels threatening. In fact, they feel kind of comforting. Soft voice, calm lighting, long conversations about trauma, loneliness, depression, shame, all of the kinds of things that most people keep buried away. Apparently, a lot of people felt deeply connected to her almost immediately, not casually connected, emotionally connected. Like she understood things about them nobody else seemed to understand. Honestly, I get why that would be powerful because when somebody speaks directly to pain you haven't been able to explain to anyone else, it creates this sweeping feeling of relief, like finally being seen after a long time of feeling invisible. But the more I listen to the stories of the people around her, the stranger the whole thing started feeling. Because this wasn't just fans watching videos online. According to former followers and investigative reporting, some people around Teal became intensely emotionally attached to her. And I don't just mean admiration. I mean the kind of attachment where somebody starts slowly becoming your emotional reference point, the person you go to for clarity, for validation, for interpretation. Almost like they become responsible for explaining your own emotions back to you. Honestly, that should make you feel uncomfortable because there's a very strange psychological shift that can happen when somebody consistently makes you feel more emotionally understood than anyone else in your life. You stop just listening to them. You start emotionally leaning on them, depending on them. One thing that kept standing out to me while I was watching interviews and accounts from former followers was how intensely personal the relationship seemed to become. Apparently, people around her felt like Teal could see directly into their emotional wounds almost immediately. That kind of emotional precision can feel almost supernatural when you're vulnerable enough, especially if you already feel isolated. Especially if you already feel broken. Teal was making these people feel deeply understood, so their brains started attaching the ideal of safety to her. She was relief for them, comfort for them. And that's where things started getting complicated. According to critics and former followers, some people around Teal eventually became emotionally dependent on her guidance and worldview. Not through obvious force. That's the important part. Nobody thinks they're being manipulated while they're feeling loved, understood, or emotionally supported. That's why situations like this are so difficult to recognize in real time. Because from the outside, it doesn't necessarily feel dangerous. It feels like healing, at least in the beginning. Honestly, I think that is what is most disturbing. The realization that emotional dependency can apparently form in environments that initially feel comforting instead of controlling. The more I looked into this story, the more I kept thinking about how badly human beings want somebody to understand them completely, not partially. in their entirety, especially during periods of grief, depression, loneliness, trauma, all the moments where people feel emotionally untethered from themselves. Because if somebody arrives during one of these moments and makes you feel fully seen, that connection can become incredibly powerful very quickly, maybe even too powerful. Over time, criticism surrounding Teal Swan became more public. Former followers started describing uncomfortable emotional dynamics. Podcasts, documentaries, and interviews questioned whether some of her methods encouraged psychological dependency rather than healing. At the same time, though, many followers defended her intensely and said she genuinely changed their lives for the better. I think that complexity is part of what makes this story so interesting. Nothing about these situations is ever completely simple. The most unsettling stories usually aren't, but I think there's still something important underneath all of this. Because whether somebody sees Teal Swan as manipulative, misunderstood, genuinely healing, or some combination of all three, this story reveals something very real about people, especially vulnerable people. The need to feel understood can become so powerful that it overrides instincts we would normally trust. And once emotional safety becomes attached to a single person, walking away from them can start feeling emotionally terrifying, even when you know something feels wrong. I don't know. There's just something unsettling about the idea that manipulation doesn't always begin with fear. Sometimes it begins with relief, with somebody finally saying exactly what you needed to hear at exactly the moment you needed to hear it. And maybe that's why stories like this become so difficult for people to recognize while they're inside of them. Because emotional comfort doesn't feel dangerous, it feels safe, it feels healing, it feels like finally being understood. And by the time that feeling starts turning into dependency, people may already be too emotionally attached to see the shift happening clearly, to free themselves.